new book, and get a copy. People have loved it. I actually had multiple people say it's the best business book they've ever read. And if you look on Amazon, a lot of great reviews from entrepreneurs and CEOs. And it's really the new book, From Impossible to Inevitable, is about, how do you grow faster? So it brings me to why I'm here. So my story was in parallel. 6 years ago, I was single, and I got married. We started having kids, lots of kids. And I remember there was this moment. It was probably about 2011, after my wife got pregnant quickly. And I had this oh shit, I have to make more money in more regular ways because the family was expanding. We need to move to a bigger place, and I grew my income 11 times to almost $1 million a year, not quite. And what I've seen is that in parallel, I've consulted with companies for years, and I've seen lots of companies who, again, they had something valuable, they wanted to grow it, and some grew by 10x or hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a company called Responsus that was sold to Oracle for $1.5 billion, and most of their growth from 20 to 200 million was powered by this sales system that we helped them build. But a lot, some floundered and didn't work, right? So to me, what's the difference between these companies that are able to speed up into hyper growth and ones that struggle? And that's really what the new book is about. What are the differences between fast growth companies and companies that aren't growing faster, and how do you grow faster? So a lot of the companies that I've either worked with, or I have a co-founder, Jason Lemkin, who founded SaaStr, but a lot of the learnings are based off of companies like Salesforce, who's now actually 8 billion, maybe 9 next year. EchoSign, my co-author Jason Lemkin started EchoSign, right? Took it to more than 100 million, sold it to Adobe. Zenefits, which has gotten some bad press, but still one of the fastest growing companies ever. And Acquia, which is the #1 fastest growing company in the US a year and a half or 2 years ago. Okay, so these are incredibly fast growing companies. What do they do differently? So the book has 7 sections or 7 painful truths. Now, one of them, everyone probably suffers from more than one, but what I'm asking is probably pick out the one that seems to resonate the most for you, because you only do one thing at a time anyway. But the first one is the most common. If you're struggling to grow, you don't feel like you're growing as fast as you want, and it's interesting, a lot of these are all about really business problems, but if you look at a personal career, it's so much is in the same principles around what grows a career as what grows a business. So you can read it the same way as an individual if you're not a CEO or entrepreneur or executive. But these really are, how do you grow a business faster? So I can tell you there's so many companies I've talked to over the years who said, hey, we want to grow faster. And I've learned now that a lot of these companies, they're not ready to grow faster. That's usually the problem. And a lot of these companies, when you're earlier stage, you get some word of mouth, you get to a few $100,000, a few million in revenue, and you start to spend money on sales and marketing, and it doesn't work. And what the problem is you don't realize the difference between growing through word of mouth or relationships, which is how you get started, as you should, versus when you start to do some sort of colder outbound prospecting, colder marketing to people who haven't heard of you. The difference is the gap is way bigger than you realize or expect. It might be 5, 10, 100 times harder to market or sell to people who haven't heard of you than people who've heard of you, even tangentially. Get that word right. And so we call this the arc of attention. And really, if you're an early stage company, or again, you're someone who's always gotten jobs, opportunities through people who know you, to try to generate leads or sell to people who don't know you, you call this trust gap you have to cross. And that's really part of how you get to the place where you're able to grow. Because generally, growth requires you at some point to be able to market and sell to people who haven't heard of you. That's how you can sort of take off the limiters. And when you haven't gotten to that point of learning how to sell to people who haven't heard of you, you end up with elevator pitches sort of like this. I'll just read a sample, not the whole thing. This is a real one where they actually had this is a past client from years ago. They're trying to speak to everybody because they're afraid of missing out on something. But they've got a phrase, we help clients maximize their return on investment in the cloud by providing implementation, development, and value-added software solutions. It's so vague as to be worthless. I love this far side where at the top he's saying, hey, okay, Ginger, I've had it. Stay out of the garbage, Ginger, or else. At the bottom, the dog is saying blah, 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 ginger, blah, 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 ginger. So again, when you think you're speaking to people in a way, like, hey, we do sales, we do this, that, and the other, but almost always, unless you force yourself to figure out how to communicate with people who haven't heard of you, it just comes out as gobbledygook. Right? And it's hard to get at the point where it's really clear messaging that resonates with people who don't recognize you personally or your brand. Because when they don't know you, they're not willing to spend any energy to figure you out. If it's not immediately obvious, they move on. So another reason it's a challenge for companies to get ready to grow is oftentimes you've got all these interesting things that you can offer, all these ways you can help people. And you're like, we can do everything. We can do anything. What do you need? We can do it. And all that does, it just confuses people. When you give too much, whether it's on your website or first meeting, it's hard to say, all right, you know what? We're going to focus on just a few key things. So if you can declutter all these things you do and make it obvious how you can help them, and they're like, okay, I see how you can help me. So part of this is like, how do you nail a niche? How do you focus on something, specialize and talk about it in a way that's obvious to others? So the simplest way to begin is thinking, all right, if you want about nailing a niche, and when you say the word niche, in Canada say niche, whatever, but it's not about thinking small, it's about being focused. It's about, narrowing in on one, a small number of things and doing them really well. And when you do that too, it makes it easier to find the people who are relevant and talk to them in a way that they can get it. So in other words, you want to be a big fish in a small pond, and it's easier to make the pond smaller than the fish bigger. Right? So it's like, think more focused. So a few examples of companies who've done this, right? Amazon started, they all had dreams of world e-commerce domination, but Amazon started in books, Facebook with Ivy League schools, Salesforce with Salesforce automation, Zappos with shoes, and Zappos with shoes, right? But they all had big dreams. They started a place where they could do, shoes is big, but for them, a place where they could really do it well, as we call it a beachhead or a first niche. So what do you do with this? Well, I also find one other way to think about it, it can be sort of the most helpful right away, is really be more disciplined on defining when are you a nice to have versus when are you a need to have, right? Because we're so excited to sell to everybody. Oh, you could use this. Yeah, sure, we could do this. But do they need you, right? Or are you a nice to have? Because if you're a nice to have, you're just going to fall off the priority list at some point. That's why if you get demos but no one buys, you're probably a nice to have. If people say, hey, that's cool, but they don't buy, then you're a nice to have. Right? And you want to focus on those fewer situations and understand the differences to when are you a need to have. This is my daughter, Aurora. I'll give you a little example where, she would come and at Christmas, she actually got these iTunes gift cards from friends and from us and say, hey, Dad, can you buy these from me? I don't need them. There's like $150 of iTunes cards. And I was like, if they're Amazon cards, we use those all day, sure. But no, I'll buy $25 just because, do you a favor. I don't spend any money on iTunes. And she's like, all right. And a few days later, she actually came back to me and said, hey, Dad, do you realize, we do Friday night movie night. Do you know there's a bunch of classic movies we want to get, and you can use these iTunes cards to get some of these movies. And I was like, but actually you're right. And she flipped it for me seeing this as like a nice to have, I don't really need it to, okay, well, actually I can use these or I need them. And I bought them. Now, in real life, it'll never be that easy, but the principle is the same. How do you position what you're doing? It's usually targeting the right kinds of, like a specific kind of situation or company, and talk to them in a way that they see you as a need to have, not that something that's interesting or cool. So in other words, here we're talking about nailing a niche to get rich. The book goes into aspects of how do you sort of prioritize your different opportunities. There's sort of a couple workshop processes it outlines, and this is all part one of the book, the 20 interviews, because you can take this and again prioritize your opportunities and turn it into defined ideal customer profiles, email sequences, and so on. But the idea is focusing on where do you have the best chance to find people who need you and who are actually going to be interested in buy. And stop spreading yourself too thin over trying to do too many things for too many kinds of people. Because that usually is the first growth killer for both companies and individuals. All right, so let's say you know who you're targeting. The painful truth number 2, I mentioned there's 7 parts, 7 painful truths, is that overnight success is a fairy tale. Right? And we're surrounded by social media, people who have overnight success. But if you want to drive growth, first thing to understand is that lead generation is your big lever. And you can have the perfect product, the perfect sales process and people, but if you don't have great leads, you're going to struggle. If you have great leads, you can get pretty much everything else wrong and still do pretty well. And the important thing is there's 3 types of leads to understand and the differences between them. Sort of like at home, we got 3 types of princesses. They've all got their pros and cons, right? There's the classic little girl princess. Definitely lots of pros. There's the grandpa princess. Probably more cons here. And then there's the little brother princess. This is when the 12-year-old sister has free time, makeup, and a willing little brother princess, Maverick. But we call them seeds, nets, and spears. The new book, if you read Predictable Revenue, it updates this idea, different types of leads. It's important to understand that seeds are really word-of-mouth driven leads. Nets are marketing. Spears are prospecting. And what's important is that the differences are they have different funnels, usually different types of ideal customer profiles, different ways you generate them, different ways you respond to them. Could be sales cycle lengths, could be different deal sizes. So a lot of early stage companies will take all their data usually based on word of mouth sales and start to project out. And their projections are totally wrong because to sort of hit their growth goals, they need to generate a lot of marketing leads or prospecting leads, again, which have different kinds of funnels and metrics. So in order to have some sense of what it actually is going to take to grow, you have to understand these 3 types and what kind of mix you need for your business to generate them. The best way for word of mouth to try to create some sort of system, we believe, is customer success. Right? Word of mouth is hard. They're the best leads, but they're hard to grow. But if you can invest in customer success, and in SaaS companies, and who here is at a SaaS company or tech or software, a product like B2B software? So for sure, if you don't have right now it's standard, you have a customer success team of people who work with customers, and their job is not necessarily, can be, sometimes they upsell, cross-sell, but their main job is to make sure that customers are successful. They are getting value and that they see the value. But the principle is the same no matter what you do. You might apply it differently. Happy customers are an investment. So customer service, you can look at it as an expense, or if you do it the right way, you can look at it as an investment. Because happy customers mean more referrals, less attrition, especially in SaaS, more and better testimonials and case studies. Or if you're in a retail environment, more better Yelp reviews, right? So it's an investment. So it's saying spend money on customer success because it's part of your overall sales and marketing funnel. Customer success is not about customer satisfaction. It's about driving revenue growth. If you look at it that way. Right, move on. So one tip, especially if you're in a product company, is that with customer success, it's just do it earlier, faster. A lot of companies in Silicon Valley, by the time they're 10 or 15 people, have a dedicated person in customer success, whether they're senior or not. The second type, nets, is classic inbound marketing or marketing funnel. Right? You might drive website leads that go to salespeople. Right? This is in a B2B company. But nets really are casting a wide net. And generally, again, if you have a head of marketing, sales has a quota. Why doesn't marketing? So nowadays, it's becoming more common for marketing to have a lead commit, lead quota, or something that drives them as a goal, like some kind of lead-based goal. The third type is spears, right? Outbound prospecting. This has been my specialty. This is why I created Salesforce.com. And with spears, the nice thing is that you can be if you have a type of customer that is worth $10,000 or $20,000 in lifetime value, or partners, you can be very targeted in going out and talking to people who aren't calling you. Right? It can be incredibly effective. This is what's generated, $1 billion or more for Salesforce. And really, it's about who you want to go after, and that's going to be more specific than you might have a general sort of overall company customer profile. But outbound will be more specific, and then sending some sort of sequence of emails and phone calls or whatever, some sort of outreach to get in touch with them, have appointments, qualify opportunities, and then close them. And when you get this working, it can be very predictable to create revenue. And I mentioned Acquio as a company that built a team of prospectors. They started with 3, and they realized, okay, we expect one dedicated prospector to generate $750,000 in revenue per year. So let's hire 40 of them, right? So they wanted to make breaking $100 million a when, not if problem. Right? Now, all these leads have pros and cons, and for the pros of Outbound is that it can be very predictable. You can get into bigger companies, do bigger deals. It's a great complement to Inbound. The problem with Outbound is that unlike customer success and marketing, Outbound is not a great fit for everybody. So you need to have a certain, again, valuable type of partners to go after, or customers. Right? And actually the book has more details on when we think it's a good fit or not. Now the third painful truth here is if you have sales, especially, speeding up growth creates more problems than it solves. In other words, the faster you grow, it might be sexy to read about Slack, but on the inside, a fast growth company usually has way more problems than a slowing, there's more things that are happening, more things are breaking, definitely more unhappy customers, because you just have more. So it's like you have to be willing, almost the more pain you can deal with in terms of problems means the faster you're able to grow. Perfectionists don't grow fast that way. There's a couple main ideas in this section. One is the different types of VPs of sales, depending on the stage you're at, VPs and for B2B companies. It's just thinking, if you're an earlier stage company, you probably don't want to hire someone from like Salesforce.com who's used to running a big team at a big company. It's just usually not a good fit. And just some tips, if you're a CEO hiring a VP of sales, when you or it could be actually any executive, but when you're interviewing them, you should learn something from them. If you feel like you're teaching them something, that's not a good fit. Someone who comes in should help upgrade the talent. You should see results quickly within a sales cycle. And again, just because they have a big name company on their resume, it doesn't mean they're going to be able to do well at your company. And especially if they've been at a big company, they're used to a big expense account, they're used to having a lot of support, they don't have to do their own travel, they don't have to write their own collateral. So you just got to don't be blinded by the resume. Now, the VP of Sales at EchoSign and LinkedIn had some suggestions. Again, so when he started at the company, he wanted to drive the deal size up as fast as he could, as fast as he can. He knew when he brought reps in that he'd see real results or progress in 30 days. Right? It doesn't take a long time to figure out if they're going to be a fit. If you have a longer sales cycle, it doesn't mean they may close, but they could see tangible progress quickly. Whether it's from the executives down or from the reps up, honesty. People like to stay together if they've been successful together, work together. And again, if you don't be too attached to doing just inbound lead generation or just outbound, right? They taste great together like peanut butter and chocolate. The other idea around making sales scalable, that's probably the most important place to start, is specialization. And it's saying that if you have salespeople, and again, we've done this with engineering, with HR, in almost every other function, you've got specialized people. But in sales, it's not uncommon to have 50 salespeople, and they're all doing the same thing. They're all doing their own prospecting, they're all doing their own closing, they're all managing some sort of book of business. Right? Now the model is specializing where it might be these 4 core roles, it might be a bit different, but you've got prospectors who prospect, right? Outbound prospecting, inbound response reps who are handling inbound, like website-based leads, new business closers, and then some variety of roles for after the sale's done, which could include services, support, customer success, account management, right? But it's a specialized team, just like any sports team. We have a bunch of people, but they're all doing different things together in harmony. I don't know any sport, there's probably one out there, but I don't know any sports team where you've got 10 players and they're all just out there playing, doing their own thing. Right? This is the number one thing that will make, if you have salespeople or customer-facing people, if you do this, this will be the number one thing that will change, that will double your productivity or results. Right? And by doing this, this actually makes it easier to understand what's working, what's not, to scale, to hire, and you get this farm team system where you can bring in junior people who are great that don't have the experience, and they can grow up through the ranks. Okay? Bottom line is, if you don't specialize, you're going to struggle. There's one common question I get, which is, well, look, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm one person selling. I can't specialize. Well, if you're one person, and this is true of anybody, the way that you apply this idea is you block out time on your calendar. So whether you're in sales or whatever that thing is you can't get to, when I was writing this book, I had to block. I got tons of kids. I have a business. I have a software business and services business. If I didn't block out Wednesdays to write, the book would have never gotten done. So, last thing, that, like in terms of sales and marketing techniques, this is the fourth section. This one's called, it's hard to build a big business out of small deals. You want to double your deal size. Right? Again, the sooner you can do bigger deals, the better. Okay, that was easy. Got that? Yeah. And then the last parts of the book, part 5 is really one of my favorites, and this is really around the journey. Right? And number 5, the painful truth is it's going to take years longer than you want. Right? It's related to what Nicholas said. So I think it's not uncommon to hear, oh, it'll take longer than you think, but it's going to take years longer than you want. And whether this is like a big career leap, or specifically in the chapter of the book, it talks about starting a company, and it's probably 5 to 10 years to start a company and get to some sort of exit or result. It's not 3 years. It's not 2 years. Whatever you see on, Instagram, whatever. Who here has heard of Slack? All right, Slack is one of the fastest growing SaaS companies. And there's all these articles when it came out that, hey, from 0 to $1 billion in 18 months, or 0 to $1 billion in 9 months, or whatever. But it took them 5 or 6 years of grinding out other ideas until they sort of hit on the thing that took off, right? So they've been at it for at least 7 or 8 years by now. And just a few points. We live in this, reality distortion world. We're surrounded by social media. It's all these stories of people's success because that's what get published. It's not that interesting to publish a story about how my day sucked, or it took 10 years. I mean, it's just those kinds of stories take a long time. It's a lot sexier to say, hey, in 30 days I made $20 million. So again, we're surrounded by that. We start to think, oh, everyone else is crushing it while I'm struggling. Because 95% of your day, if you're an entrepreneur at least, or a parent, is probably spent dealing with problems, and 5% on solutions, right? You don't spend your time on things that are working well. So again, there's this disconnect. And that's why we're in this like anxiety economy where everyone's everyone's succeeding, I'm not, and it's anxiety and depression and loneliness are now some of the top issues facing our society, especially the younger people. Or that compare and despair. But it's probably, if you were doing a technology company, it's probably 2 to 3 years to get it to the point where you even know if there's something there, and 5 to 10 to exit in some way, how you define that. So last couple points. Now this section is really for executives or leaders, and for leaders, this painful truth is your employees are renting, not owning their jobs. Now there's a couple letters in the book, and I've had different people say this is their favorite part of the book. They've never seen something like this, but obviously you don't need to read this. But this is a letter from an employee to executives. Basically says, hey, executives, I like working here, but I'm underappreciated. I don't feel respected. I want to contribute more. I know I could crush it if I had the right chance. Right? Some of you probably could write this letter right now, or maybe you did in the past. And then there's a letter from the executive to the employees. It says something like, dear employee, I'm glad you're here. Obviously, I'm excited about your potential. If I wasn't, I wouldn't have hired you. But you have to realize that the people who want to leapfrog in their careers don't need their hands held all the time to do that. By definition, if you want to leapfrog in your career, you need to take the initiative, figure out how to solve a problem, go find a problem to solve it, and solve it for me. If I have to tell you what problem to solve and how to solve it, you're making more work for me. So it's a little bit of a reality check for, I think a lot of the people who are newer to business. And I've heard again from a lot of millennials that they sort of nailed it for their culture, and they felt like, okay, now I have a better sense of what it will take for me to succeed in my career. Right? But I think the idea here is that for employees, think about this, which is when you rent a car versus you have your own car, how do you treat it? Or when you own a house versus rent an apartment, how do you treat them? Or if you rent an apartment, when you go to a hotel, how do you treat it if you don't own one? Or when you're babysitting your kids versus others, how does that feel? Right? That's renting versus owning. And the chapter has a lot of details on how do you help employees feel more like owners of their jobs and not just like, hey, I'm just here clocking time. Which actually, the last part here, painful truth number 7, this is the chapter for employees. Right? This is who here is an executive of some sort, CEO or, okay. It's like, this is the chapter you want to give to your employees, just like read this is the idea, right? And employees often let their frustration stop, well, true of everybody. It's like, but do you let frustration stop you or do you let them motivate you? Because every problem, a problem is an opportunity. Right? And I think with more experience, I've learned that the money and opportunity success doesn't come from the easy rides. It comes from like the really hairy challenges, right? The scary ones.